That's correct. Okay, welcome to the One Life podcast, and today we are in our second interview of the day. It's a double header. It reminds me of baseball season that's going around, and I'm excited today because selfishly we have someone who is going to be talking about dadhood and fatherhood, which is something that's very personal to me, and then also someone who has been doing just lots of other great things around the world, frankly. And today's guest is Jon Vroman, and he is an author, a speaker. He has a podcast. He's the founder of the Front Row Foundation. His book is Front Row Factor, and most recently he started a program to help dads become better dads. I mean, I will talk about that, and I'm sure he has a better way of putting it, but I love it because there's not other programs out there like that, and it's really cool to see someone doing something so valuable out in the world. So thanks, Jon, for the time, and we really appreciate you spending some time with the One Life community today.
I love the One Life community. This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm grateful to be here.
So to always get started, we kind of ask the story of how we got here, and I'm curious for you. You lead this retreat, and I've seen pictures, reflections, and I'm excited to now get a chance to have a reason to go to one of these retreats. But at the end of it is you've built this community of dads who really care about being a dad, and there's this stigma that's been built for much of the last couple of decades about dads being dumb, or dads being incapable, or dads being whatever, and I think that you're playing a large role in the shifting of that stereotype. So why do you do this? Why do you spend so much time here? What led you to kind of wanting to start this group and this program and kind of catch us up along the way there?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And the last decade of my life really has been dedicated to working with people who are fighting for their life. And what I've learned is that you can learn a lot about living life from people who are fighting for it. And one of the things I've learned is that you have to prioritize, and you have to choose consciously what you want to do with your moments. And we never know how many we're going to get. Hopefully we get a lot. Hopefully we live long, happy, healthy lives. But I know I'm not fully in control. And so I know that I must cherish the moments, And so the charity that we started 12 years ago set me on a path to really be hyper-focused on making the most of the moments. And our core belief as a Front Row family, we call ourselves, is, how do we consciously create, experience, and celebrate the meaningful moments of life? It's a driving question that we have. And so we're constantly asking that. How can we consciously create, experience, and celebrate the meaningful moments of life? And when you have kids, you realize that if you talk to people who've traveled down the road and ask them for advice, they'll always say it goes by fast. They say, enjoy it. It goes by really fast. And, for me, I was, here I was, I had a charity, and I was a keynote speaker, and I was living my dream but if I were to measure it against where I wanted to be and where I was so happy about the way things were going. But then something happened to me where I was at an event and somebody had asked me what I do. And my identity was very much wrapped up in the charity that we had started and the work that I was trying to do. And I started to answer that way about the charity and the work. And then I cut myself off and I said, what I really do is I'm a husband and a father. And when I'm not doing that, I happen to do these other things. Now, that was how I really felt in my heart. That was a true statement of how I wanted to be in life. But when I looked at my previous, I had how old was he at the time? He would have been about 5.5, 6 years old. My son, 5.5 and 6. I thought about the last 5.5 years, and then I looked at my calendar and I started thinking about my life and how I was living it. And I realized that I was a businessman with a family. And what I really wanted to be was a family man with a business. And that to me was the turning point. And when I had that thought, when I had that clarity, I needed to go back to the drawing board and reinvent my life and my business so that I could then actually live out the belief that I knew was true, that I was here to be a father and a husband, not a business person primarily. Now, I'd love to have both, right? I want to build a thriving, successful business, and I want to show my kids how to work hard. But I also knew that a lot of times I hid behind that excuse of, I want to show my kids how to work hard. I want to teach them big work ethic. I hid behind that to escape to work, because parenting is hard, because marriage is hard at times, right? And I hid behind my work because I was a hero there, because I could control that a bit more, because, it was for me where I went to be successful. And so when I looked at my calendar and I saw that I had 17 events on how to be a better speaker or coach or author or community leader, and I looked at all the calls I had, and I looked at my bookshelf and I saw the hundreds of books that I read about leadership and mindset and all these things. And I thought, how many books have I read on parenting? How many events have I been to about parenting? And if that's really my primary role, if that's really the most important thing, if it truly is family first, I need to adjust this. And so we did. We started a retreat in October of 2016, where a few friends got together, and the rest is history, as you could say. And we started this community. We now have monthly calls. We bring in experts. And my wife has said to me, she said, not too long ago, she said, "You're a much better dad and husband ever since you started the Front Row Dads." And I said, yes, you are right about that 100%. Because just like anything, when you put attention to it, when you surround yourself with other great people and have great conversations, and you focus on it, it will grow. And so, no doubt, 2 years later, I'm much more proud of who I am as a dad. These days I spend, no exaggeration, I spend between 4 to 5 hours with my kids every single day. I'm with my kids from 7 a.m. till 9 a.m. every single morning. When I'm not traveling, I've cut my travel by 50%. I'm done working by 5 every day, and I spend from 5 to 8:30 with my kids. I take my son to climbing practice. I take my kids to afters. We play at the park. We cook together. We hang together. And now when I look in the mirror, I recognize a guy that I will not be 70 years old looking back with deep regret about what I missed. And so that's it, man. That's a story of how we got to where we are today.
That is absolutely amazing. I love that, Jon. There's so many awesome nuggets. I'm frantically writing down notes here. And one thing, so thank you. You are an amazing human. I'm so honored to know you and to be in your orbit. And we are so grateful to be able to have you here on One Life. You have so much to teach. And what I love about listening to you is that it's authentic from the heart, and you're giving lessons for us to be able to take away. And the big one, when I met you, was you introduced yourself, like you said earlier, as a husband and a father. And that resonated with me, because then I copied it. And I said, when you say about who you are, like, I'm a mom, because that's the number one thing. And Hector, he's a dad. Like, bam, what's more important than that?
Yeah.
And what I really, I love this, you're a bit, rather than being a businessman with a family, you're a family man with a business.
Yeah.
Just solid.
Well, hey, when you play that out a little bit, I mean, let's be honest. If there's guys out there listening, if you were at an event and somebody said, "What do you do?" and you only answered by saying, "Well, I'm a dad," my bet is that a lot of guys out there, you would either think this about somebody else, or you'd be worried they're thinking it about you. Is what they're really what the other person's thinking in their head is, "Oh, he must have failed in business." And he's right, or whatever it is, or maybe they're thinking you are ultimately successful and retired and we're a dad. But I think if we answer like, "I'm a dad," people go, "Oh, wait a minute, what happened? What's wrong?" Right? Like, I don't think that's good. I think we should be really proud of that. That's our primary role. I mean, what's more important?
Well, what was that process like for you, though, Jon? Of like, I mean, I'm only a month in, and I'm practicing mindfulness in the moment, because I'm seeing where there's this almost dying of my old self, and you have to kind of, I don't know, sacrifice has just been the theme of this first month. So what was that journey like of kind of switching? I know you've had success in business, all the way from being, a top a top sales manager to being speaker of the year to writing, best-selling book to having, a top podcast and to be able to put those things, not aside, but to put them.
Oh, you can say that. There's definitely a shift in priority. And listen, a lot of people, like, think about this. Makes sense, right? You spend your whole life focused on you, building your days are yours. You can just wake up and work out, go to work, and then cook and eat and travel and do all these things. And then when you have kids, your life is no longer just yours. You have these humans that you're responsible for. And there's no doubt that there is a part of you, the part of the story that was an old chapter. That's not you anymore. So there is a killing off of an identity or an ego or a part of you that was like, hey, that's what it was back then. And now there's something new. So it's really hard. I know I struggled with it. I know a lot of guys struggle with it. And I have really brutally honest conversations with men about this. I've had brutally honest conversations with men where their marriages are falling apart, their families are falling apart, and yet they're crushing it in business. And when I ask them point blank, would you be willing to give up your business for your family? There's silence on the line. There's a lot of men who are not willing to give up their businesses for their family if there was a choice, right? And people have said to me directly, my identity is so wrapped up in that I feel like if I didn't succeed in the business, that a part of me would be dead. It would feel like death. And I get that. I totally get that, which is why that transition of giving part of your life to your children in such a huge way is really difficult. And it needs to be a conscious choice. We also need other people around us in that transition to support us through, which is why the brotherhood for us is so important, because it's great when somebody can just look at you and go, I know, man, I know how that feels. Let's talk about it, right? This isn't, it's not weak to talk about it. It's like, let's get clarity so that you can then go back to doing what you do best, which is taking action and making stuff happen, just in a different way now, just with a different focus.
Yeah, that is so amazing. What would you say is one of the biggest learnings that you've experienced since you started the Front Row Dads?
Ooh, wow. Well, at every one of our retreats, we have these sessions where guys share their best ideas. This is an opportunity for guys to say, this is what's working. And then we share all of our ideas. And usually guys walk away from that session with one or two new concepts, new ideas that just are game changers for their family. And so now, after a couple years of doing this, I've got several of those ideas, that I could just start rattling off a concept here. And I'll give you one. So it's not just speaking in theory. So I'll go to the very first retreat. I invited my good friend, Jim Shields, to come in. He wrote a book called The Family Board Meeting.
Yes.
And Jim, who I know is a friend of many in these communities that we're a part of, his book, basically, I'm going to give the whole concept in 30 seconds. You have a meeting with one child. So this is a one-to-one situation, a meeting, 4 hours, every 90 days. And it's an activity of the child's choice, no technology. And you basically review the day at the end of the day. And it's just one-to-one time, and it's scheduled on the calendar. Now that sounds really simple. That doesn't sound like an idea that people might say, that's going to change my life. But like many things, right? Eat fruits and vegetables, go for a jog a couple of miles a day, and watch how your health transforms. It's not complicated, right? This idea is a game changer for so many people. And because Jim created this structure and this clarity around it, our guys subscribe to it. We have a lot of guys who do these board meetings. And for me, it's been really important. Tiger knows how many we've done. He monitors the time. This is sacred time for he and I. And so that's, we have a bunch of ideas like that, right? We have these monthly training calls where I'll bring in a guest expert, and they'll say, they'll be teaching for 20 minutes, and yet they'll say one thing, and you're like, that's a game changer for me. That concept is a game changer. I'll give you an example of that. So we had a guy on, Ted Lowe, a marriage expert. right? And one of the things he said was that they have a statement in their family, a phrase, a mantra. And the mantra is, whenever they get a little on edge, they say, "We know tragedy, and this isn't it. We know tragedy, and this isn't it." In other words, to bring perspective, we know tragedy with the genocide that happens over here and the clean drinking water problem over here. We know real tragedy. And this little argument we're having, this little bit that we're going through right now, this isn't real tragedy. And it just brings it back to like, hey, let's take a deep breath. Let's move on. This isn't the end of the world, right? That's like a concept I was taught 20 years ago. Just look ahead into the future and say, is this thing I'm all worked up about going to be a huge issue 20 years from now? And if it's not going to be a huge issue 20 years from now, let's just let it go. There's so many of those things that, and not only are they great to learn, especially when we hear them differently, we hear them phrased differently, that they feel fresh to us, but we also need to train. We need to be in rhythm and habits of like hearing things that work. One of the things that I've heard over the years is people will say to me like, "Jon, I get it. Like you go to these live events, you go to a One Life event, you go to Tony Robbins, you go here, you go there, and you get all pumped up, and then you come home and you kind of get back into your groove." And I'd say, and they go, how do you stay at level 10? And I said, I don't know that I have the answer to stay at level 10, because I think that part of the reason I go back to those events is I'm going back to recharge. I'm going back to reconnect. It's why you can't go to the gym just once. If somebody went to the gym once and like, I worked out hard, why is it my muscles won't stay strong? You go, well, you got to keep at it. And so the same thing with parenting, these are ideas that, I forget so much of what I learned. I need to hear these things over and over again.
I'm curious, Jon, and I love the family board meeting. I'm curious, my son, Cashton, is a month old. So I'm wondering what we would do for those 4 hours right now.
Well, here's the thing, it's a great question. And here's what I would do. I would start the habit now. And you know what I would do for 4 hours? I would cuddle. I'd literally cuddle. I would whisper positive words and affirming statements, to your son. I would be in the presence of your son. I would say a prayer for your son. I would meditate on your son. I would just spend that time journaling with your son present about his future and what type of dad you want to be. But if you could condition yourself now to spend that time and to get connected, and you know what you're really doing with those 4 hours also? Supporting mom. You see what I mean? Like I tell dads all the time, I go, you know what your primary role is when you have a newborn? Mom support. Your job is to make sure mom is great. Cooking, cook extra food, take up, clean, make sure everything is taken care of so that she can then do what she needs to do that only she can do with the baby. And so that's where those 4 hours come in, is like, that's your time, babe. I've got, Cashton. So that's how I would invest that time. You start that as soon as they're born, 4 hours every 90 minutes. And it's not like that's the only time. I know you're spending more time than that, but you get into the discipline of that and that routine, and then it will continue on. You could even think about how proud you would be to be able to say to your son when they turn 18 or some point in their life, they're like, we've been doing this board meeting ever since you were born. This has been a tradition for us. Like very few things have been that type of tradition in a family's life.
Powerful. You mentioned some great tips. I want to kind of go a little more maybe abstract as we at least move towards the end of this. And this has been great. I would encourage anybody in the One Life community or catching this interview to go find Jon and look into the Front Row Dads and the Front Row family. It's not even just for dads, it's really Front Row family. I'm curious if you were to think about maybe some general principles or some general philosophies that dads, moms, parents, it probably could extend to humans. Like what do you find are those themes that keep coming up every retreat, or those themes that keep coming up every talk that underlying, for someone who's maybe just getting started on this journey? Like what are the big things, the big boulders that they really need to pay attention to?
Well, so when we sat down to write the Front Row Factor book, that was 10 years into doing these experiences, right? And so we had quite a bit of exposure to these families that we were working with. We had some time to think about what's most important in life. right? Especially with somebody that has a shortened timeline. Moments become extra valuable in many ways, you could argue. And so here's what we came up with. When we said, where's the secret sauce? What are the core values of what's working here and why these events are so powerful and why people are attracted to this? We came up with three things. It's hope, it's celebration, and it's living in the moment. These are the three core values of our charity. They're the three core values of what makes these events special. And here's why. Hope is the power of bringing possibility of the future into the present moment so that we can feel about that and do something about that. Hope isn't this light word that just means, well, I hope things change. That's wishful thinking when we think of it that way. Like we're wishing that something was different. But hope is the power of looking into the future and saying, I see possibility there. And because of that, because I have hope, I'm going to do something about it today. It's going to change my behavior. And we see that in our charity where we'll tell somebody they're going to go to the event of their dreams. And next thing you know, they're fighting extra hard in physical therapy to heal themselves and be strong for their day. So when we have a dream, when we have a vision, when we have something pulling us forward, it changes the way we operate today. And I think that's a secret sauce of life. I mean, I think that my son may get more value from Christmas in the days leading up to it than he does on Christmas Day. Because what we often find is that the anticipation of something, the excitement of something in the future is equally exciting, if not more exciting than sometimes the thing itself. I mean, sometimes we build it up so much, we're actually let down on the day because we've painted these amazing pictures. But that's okay because so much of our life could be lived into what's possible, right? That's exciting. We also have celebration. On the flip side of that, there's looking back. Celebration is the art of looking at something that just happened seconds ago or looking at something that happened years ago and pulling power from that. We look at our recipients who are in the hospitals fighting for their life, and a month or 2 months or 5 months earlier, they went on a front row event and they're looking back and they're remembering that moment. That's an anchor of positivity. That's an anchor of these uplifting emotions that people can then grab a hold of and then bring them into their present moment. Sometimes when I'm struggling in my own life, I'll look back to an ultra marathon I ran 10 years ago. I'm like, John, if you did that marathon, you could do this thing. I'll pull strength from that. I made it through that. I can make it through this, right? Or I had this experience. Remember that? That's a measuring stick. Now let's go after that and let's celebrate that. Let's look back on our life and just simply be grateful. You know, every night when I'm tucking my kids into bed and I'm tickling their backs or I'm walking out of the room, I said to my kids last night, this is a true story. I walked out of the room. I had just put them to bed, read them a book, tickled their backs. I walk out of the room. I go, guys, when you fall asleep tonight, fall asleep to something you're grateful for. That's what I said. And it's just looking back, right? Constantly asking my boys what they're hopeful for the day. What are you going to create today? What are you excited about today? And then the last piece of that is being in the moment. And that's just simply if you imagine that life is like this pendulum of swinging into the future and then swinging into the past, and that we're constantly looking at what's going to happen, what just happened. And then we oftentimes, we know the value of this, and I know one-lifers know the value of this, is the opportunity to be in the moment. You know, that's like listening to somebody and fully hearing them without thinking about what's next or what happened or what you're going to say to respond, but you're literally just in the moment, going in flow, literally as close to the exact scenario that you're in versus like, what am I going to ask them next? Or dwelling on what they just said, but you're hearing and feeling their every word. And you know what I'm talking about. It's lovely to talk to those people. It is so joyful to talk to somebody that is fully present with you because you feel like you're the only person in the room. You feel like they're hearing you. You feel like they're connected to your soul. Man, that is the juice of life. I'm not always in the moment. You know, I try to be there, but I think it's great to be in the future. I think it's great to be in the past, and I think it's great to be in the moment. And if we understand how all three of those play together to create this symphony for our lives, man, we've got the sauce. We've got to play all of those. I mean, even when I do these interviews on my podcast, I got the Front Row Factor podcast, the Front Row Dad podcast. I'm always going past, present, future. What happened to you? What happened now? What's happening then or later? You know, what's down the road? I just interviewed Lance Armstrong at an event, and I was like, Lance, let's go past, present, future. I didn't want to just hang on the past with Lance. He's got a, pretty polarizing past to many, right? I wanted to get into what is he doing now and what's he want to fight for down the road. I want to talk about all that. And that's my strategy for talking to people at parties. That's my strategy for talking to my best friends. That's my strategy for designing retreats. That's my strategy for just about everything. Past, present, future, celebration, hope, and living in the moment.
Wow. That is amazing. I could just listen to you all day. I love it. So many awesome nuggets of content and insight. And thank you. Thank you, Jon. You've been on, you have your own podcast, and you've been on many, many podcasts. Of the podcasts, of the podcasts you've been on, which is a ton, what is the one question that you wish that people would ask you more?
You're flipping the script on me. That's my question I like to throw to people. Oh man, the thing, the question I love to answer that I don't always get a chance to answer is, questions about the future. Like, what are you fighting for? What's down the road? Where do you see 10 years from now or 20 years from now? I love that question. I wish I was asked that by everybody. I love when people ask me about my kids. I love talking about them. That lights me up. They're crazy. I like when people ask me about my problems too. Sometimes people want to talk about what's working, and I think that's great, right? It's like you can learn a lot from the highlights. Like, hey, let's find out what's working and replicate that. I also think it's good to know where people still struggle, and I have lots of struggles. I have no shortage of struggles. I'm right now, things are going pretty great for me. Like I was telling somebody earlier, like, how are things? I'm like, things are awesome. I go, do you really want the answer? Because I can give you like a more in-depth answer if you really want it. I'm like, I dropped 10 pounds. I'm down 2% body fat. I just signed up for a marathon. Like I was rattling off, I had the best speech of my life last week. I just went through all these things. And I said, but if you want me to flip that around, I can tell you a few things aren't going so great also. And like in the past year, I've had some real serious challenges with Tatiana in my marriage. Like we hit some real rough patches that were very, very real, and that was real. I've had some moments where my health wasn't great. Where I thought I was drinking too many beers and too many glasses of wine. I got really good at celebrating, and I was like, I think I'm stepping over the line here. This isn't the best version of me. I've got lots of things that I could talk about like that, but I don't know. Those are a couple of things. I kind of answered my own question there, didn't I?
Yeah, you did. I totally threw it at you. I love that question. How about this? How about what you can think of an example of a front row dad moment with Ocean and Tiger, the latest one that you can throw out there for us.
Man, immediately what popped into my head was this image that I now have of us at the end of a dock on a lake in Wisconsin. My family has this house that's sort of been in the family for years, generations, in fact. And I was there when I was a kid. My dad was on the dock when he was a kid. It's that type of place. And I have this picture of my family, my wife, Tatiana, my son, Tiger, my son, Ocean. Tiger's 9, Ocean's 3. And we're all on the dock and we're just the sun sets behind us and we got this picture. And what's crazy, Carolyn, if you knew what was happening leading up to that picture, like people would see that picture and they go, Jon has the perfect life. Look at that. Look at his wife. Look at his 2 boys. Look at him on the lake. Boy, I bet he just jumps on the podcast and everybody listens and he just stands on stage. Everybody stands up and, runs this. Man, that guy, and look at his wife and look at his boy. Boy, it looks perfect. But moments before that picture was taken, there was like, we were angry at each other. I was yelling at Tiger, it was just a real family moment. But what I realized about that moment is that if we will pause and we will take a moment to look at what's beautiful in our lives and we will capture that when we look back, we can feel those great moments, and we will be able to remember those more than the arguments that we had or the disagreements or whatever it might be when we're being human, when we're having human moments. So, and that was a front row moment for me, for sure, being on that dock, and it was cool. It was really cool.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for just being real. Like you're a beautiful human, and I appreciate what you're doing in the world and your impact on the world and impact on my personal life. So thank you. Thank you for being you.
Thanks, Carolyn. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm trying. It's not always working, but I'm trying.
That's what we do every day, right?
That's it. That's what we can do.
Jon, this has been such a valuable interview, and we appreciate all the time that you've given to the One Life community over the years. You mentioned the podcast. You mentioned retreat programs. Where should dads go? Where should moms go? Where do they find out about the kind of the Front Row family?
Yeah.
Universe?
Well, that's cool. I appreciate the question, Hector. And it's been such a privilege to be part of the One Life crew. You know, Tim Rode, when I first met him, I remember Hal walked up to me and he said, dude, I met this guy, Tim Rode, and you and Tim are going to be like best buddies. You're like, Tim's like you a few years down the road. And I met Tim and I was like, I think that's pretty accurate. You know, he and I have a lot in common. And if you're listening, Tim, I love you, man. And if you're friends with Tim, then please send that guy some good vibes. Reach out, let him know you love him. He's such a wonderful human. But, you know, for everything that we're up to, everything is at frontrowfactor.com. You want the charity, if you want podcasts, if you want dad stuff, you want the book, everything's at frontrowfactor.com. And if you're out there, we talked a lot about dads. And if you just want to bypass directly to the dad stuff, just go to frontrowdads.com. And then, of course, you can search for both podcasts if you want to check them out. The Front Row Factor podcast is more about interviewing the people that we serve, the recipients, the family members, and other people who are what we say living life in the front row, who are fighting past adversity and creating these moments. And then the Front Row Dads podcast is really about how to be a better father, husband, and family man. And we always say in that place, like, hey, you know, we're building a community where if you're kicking butt as a dad, come share your ideas. And if you're getting your butt kicked, come learn. But either way, come join the Front Row Dads. We're really focused on high-performing entrepreneurial type dads is really our niche. Anybody can be a part of it, but that's really who we tend to attract mostly is these guys who have this entrepreneurial spirit, and they want to grow their families as much as they want to grow their businesses. So we'd love to have you.
So great. I'm a subscriber. Go subscribe, guys. And this has been so valuable for everybody. I think can get a little piece out of this. Guys, if you're catching this, wherever you're catching this, we want to thank you for tuning in. Go join the One Life Mighty Network. It's a new like online social platform. You can get access to the courses, all the previous talks from the One Life conferences, and then there is a Dare to Dream program next month. We're really excited about that. It's gonna be our biggest one yet. So if you guys want to get involved in that, go check out the website for details. But Jon, thanks again for hanging out. Carolyn, you're always amazing. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we will catch you guys on the next one.
Adios, everybody.
We're done. It's live.